whether the communication that they had was correct, whether they have a shared understanding about what the software is supposed to be doing. I had some notes. Aha, I have the notes. And agile development has proven to be a much more efficient way of producing software, inside companies. What I'm interested in is how we can embrace the same sort of principle of cadence, rhythm, and iteration across the whole free software ecosystem. About 6 or 7 years ago, some projects started to do what they call time-based releases. They said, you know what, in 3 months' time, we're going to make a release. And we don't know what's going to be in that release because we don't know how long it will take us to solve all of the problems. So instead of saying, we'll make a release when we have these features, they said, we'll make this release in 3 months' time. And it will have the features in it that it has. But we can guarantee you that you'll have a release in 3 months' time. And that process has now slowly grown until more and more projects are starting to do time-based releases. And what we've observed is that projects that embrace a cadence really energize the project, because it turns out that in a software community or in an open source community, there are many different kinds of skills that are interesting to bring into the community. But not all of those skills are relevant at all phases of the project. So for example, translation. Well, it's difficult to translate the software if to motivate people to translate the software if the software is still changing a lot, because they translate something and then that gets replaced with something else that they have to translate again. Or it's difficult to motivate people to translate software that isn't going to be released for a very long period of time, or that no one can tell them when it's going to be released, because the people want to work on things that they know will immediately deliver value to their friends and family. So if you have a predictable release schedule, then the translators know that in 3 months' time or in 4 months' time, this work will actually release. So having a predictable release schedule makes it easier to get translators involved. The same is true for documentation. The same is true for people whose real focus is advocacy or training. If you have a predictable release schedule, then they know that in 3 months' time, they'll be able to train people on all the new features, and they'll be able to then learn from users' experience and go back and tell the developers about that. So a cadence makes for a much healthier community. It makes for a community that gets participation, more diverse participation from different skills all the time. We also see, of course, faster development, because we spend less time going down bad ideas. In every release, there are some bad ideas, but we learn about those bad ideas faster. And so we're able to then take those bad ideas out of the software in the next release. So what I would encourage you to think about if you run an open source project is adopting a time-based release or a regular release cadence. I would encourage you to think in terms of perhaps a 3-month cycle or a 4-month cycle or a 6-month cycle, because obviously each of those divides evenly into a year. So you can look at your year and you will always have the same number of releases. I got an email from someone which was a long explanation about why actually the perfect cycle was an 8-month cycle. And I didn't know what to say, because I don't think he realized that would mean that some years he has 2 releases and some years he has 1 release, and then it would always be moving around. But to my mind, most projects now are moving to 3, 4, or 6-month releases. The Linux kernel, for example, is now on pretty much a 3-month release cycle. GNOME and KDE are both pretty much on 6-month release cycles, and they've found that there are real benefits to them in doing that. It is quite difficult to achieve that in a project because it requires strong leadership. It's not initially a natural thing for a software project to do, because the software developers tend to enjoy developing, and going into release mode really means that they need to change their focus. So left to their own devices, I think software engineers would never make a release. So it requires strong leadership. It also requires the use of some good tools. Distributed version control system, or just a version control system that has good support for branching and merging, really makes it easier for the developers to embrace a cadence, because it means that they can continue to develop on features while the core branch effectively is stabilized and packaged for release, and then they can land their features back onto that main branch when they're ready. The other tool that is really, really useful is automated testing. because if you have automated testing, I'll talk about this a little bit later, it makes it easier